Is Matthew McConaughey's Rust Cohle about to make his triumphant return to True Detective? Will we finally uncover the Yellow King mystery and learn the truth behind the Spiral Cult? Welcome back, Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy, and these are all the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in episode 2 of True Detective Season 4. And guys, there are a lot of huge references to the first season in this episode. But before we get into those, I want to talk about a few really cool Easter eggs that we actually missed in last week's episode. So the Scientist Research Center is called Tsalal. Now this is a Hebrew word meaning to become dark. So that's of course in reference to the long night that we're seeing take place here in Ennis, Alaska. But in Edgar Allan Poe's The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym Nantucket, Tsalal was an island in Antarctica where essentially a very stereotypical group of primitive natives lived and practiced cannibalism. And this may even have a connection to Carcosa and the Yellow King, as we discussed last week. Here's a big one. We think this guy, Travis, is actually Russ' dad. Now we know from season 1 that Russ spent a lot of time in Alaska.
So what's Alaska like?
It's beautiful.
And we know that his dad's name was Travis.
Coincidence? I think not!
This season is heavily connected to season 1, the best season by far. And I'm starting to think that the connections are going to go beyond that of the Spiral Cult, but have a direct connection to Rust and maybe even bring the character back to help solve this case. So the previous episode ended with them finding the scientist out in the ice. On this guy's forehead, we can see the infamous spiral from season 1 meant to depict Carcosa, this alternate realm the cultists are trying to ascend to. And as we'll discuss later, the spiral tattoo was also on Annie.
Hey now, wait a minute. I thought they caught that Spiral Cult guy from season 1.
Well, they did, but it was heavily implied that the cult was much bigger than just a few creepy hicks in Louisiana. And that implies that this spiral cult could still be out there operating on a much larger scale, as we'll discuss later. After all, this episode name-dropped the Tuttle family from season 1, which had deep ties to the Spiral Cult. As they're inspecting the bodies, we learn that one of these scientists scratched their own eyes out, giving the impression that they saw something so mortifying it drove them to madness. Now this is a callback to the VHS tape in season 1 that made each viewer scream uncontrollably.
No!
Now this goes back to the Lovecraftian style of writing that forces you to draw on your fears of what the terror could be. It also goes back to cosmic horror characters like Cthulhu and Hastur, aka the King in Yellow, and their ability to drive mortal men mad by showing them the complexities of the cosmos. In our previous breakdown, we discussed how the True Detective series, especially season 1, played heavily into the cosmic horror genre popularized by H.P. Lovecraft. Season 1 had subtle references to Lovecraft characters like the Beast Cthulhu, and even more overt references to characters like the King in Yellow by having the cult worshipping the Yellow King and striving to ascend to a realm called Carcosa.
There's this place down south where all these rich men go to devil worship. Something about some place called Carcosa and the Yellow King.
But another key pillar of this genre is to give the suggestion of a supernatural presence. And that's exactly what True Detective is once again doing brilliantly. But I think the reality of what's going on here could be even darker. There's something going on with Ennis. The lights flickering, the radio signals, the bad water, and that damn mine. Something is in that mine. Something that is affecting everyone's sanity. And I think I may know what that something is, but more on that in just a bit. So on this whiteboard, we can see a drawing of the Earth and its layers. Now this could be symbolizing the evil lying beneath Ennis and tying to the weird stuff going on down in the mine. The Earth's core would also be connected to the Earth's magnetic poles, which could cause interference with radio signals and the lights. Now over to the side on the whiteboard, we see this little drawing of what looks like a horned figure with a smiley face. And I think that this is the King in Yellow, or Hastur, the being that is worshipped by the Spiral Cult. As Danvers questions the teacher about what was going on at the research facility, we learned that they were sequencing DNA to essentially achieve immortality.
They spent decades trying to sequence the DNA of an extinct microorganism that potentially could stop cellular decay.
This is exactly what the cultists pursuing the realm of Carcosa were hoping to find, the path to immortality. And, as we'll later learn, this research facility is being funded by the same organization that was funding the private schools in Louisiana, the same schools where the children were being abused, to put it lightly. All in relation to the Spiral Cult, aka the Tuttle Cult. In the classroom, we also see this Walk for Our Planet flyer, a reference to Annie and her protest against the mine, a connection to the fact that whatever they're doing down in the mine is causing damage to nature, and is likely connected to the line from the last episode about the water being bad.
Water's bad. Turn to shit. about 3 days ago.
Perhaps what they're doing in the mine is polluting nature, and it's responsible for the madness ensuing in Ennis. The miners could also be disturbing the resting place of an ancient evil.
Oh, here we go.
Anyways, in the Rose's home, we can see this giant set of antlers, a callback to the many antlers seen throughout season 1 of True Detective in relation to the cult. On her coffee table, we can see a book by Gregory Bateson called Steps to an Ecology of Mind. Now, this book contains a collection of essays about psychiatry, evolution, anthropology, and epistemology. All, of course, connecting to the themes that we've discussed in connection to True Detective and the reality of the universe and truth as we know it. D.W. Harding of New York Review of Books says that Bateson examined the nature of the mind, seeing it not as a nebulous something lodged somewhere in the body, but instead as a network of interactions relating to oneself and their society, their species, and the universe at large. Bateson was also very big on the understanding of truth, a connection to the overall theme of understanding truth and shared delusions that we'll discuss just a little bit later. Next, we got one of my favorite lines from the episode.
Ennis is where the fabric of all things is coming apart at the seams.
This line about the fabric of reality coming apart is straight up cosmic horror because it can mean so many things. Not only can it have a literal interpretation connecting to our magnetic poles and their connection to animals, such as the reindeer and even our mammal brains, but also the magnetic poles' connection to radio waves and flickering lights. But there's also the metaphorical level of the unraveling of society and how the mind can be torn. Not just our minds, but our connected mind with our fellow man, going back to the writings of Bateson. Last week, we talked a lot about ghosts, but not literal ghosts, but ghosts that we create via our memories. Here, Rose talks about the difference between the spirit realm and mental illness, implying that she personally believes that her visions of Travis are real, whereas Navarro's sister's visions could be trauma-based illness. And then, things get eerie when we see that Rose knows all about the spiral.
It's old, Missy. Older than Ennis. Older than the ice, probably.
That line about the spiral being older than Ennis and maybe even older than the ice sent chills down my spine. Now, this is another reference to the ancient evil that we discussed last week that could be lying beneath the ice of Ennis, metaphorically, and it can also be alluding to a supernatural beast like Cthulhu, who in legend is at the bottom of the ocean. But in reality, it could be in reference to whatever lies beneath the ground, deep in the minds of Ennis, and the very stuff that the research scientists were searching for. This line about the spiral symbol being very old is also in reference to this line from Errol Childress in season 1.
My family's been here a long, long time.
Rose's knowledge of the spiral could also be another hint that she is the mother of Rust Cohle. During Rust's time back in Alaska, he likely obsessed over the case for those 8 years. So let's talk about these frozen bodies and how they're morphed together in the thawing ice. We hear Peter say from the outside that they can see 5 heads and 9 feet. Now, this reminded me so much of the beast called the Marauder from Evil Dead Rise. Pete also theorizes that something may have been chasing them, to which Danvers says,
There's no Yetis.
Now, I love how this is kind of a fourth wall break that reels the audience back in from our supernatural suspicions surrounding the case. We then hear mention of delirium being caused by the cold. Now, delirium is defined as being an alternate state of consciousness. This, of course, ties back to the madness that can be caused by Lovecraftian characters like Cthulhu and the King in Yellow, as well as the hallucinatory episodes we saw Rust have in season 1. I mean, you could argue that those were episodes of delirium. In the bar, we see these 2 guys get in a fight over the mine.
You lying people are poisoning your own kids! And we're sick and tired of you pretending you don't see it! We feed your kids!
Now, this mimics the real-world debates that we see occurring surrounding our ever-changing climate. Good-hearted people point out the fact that certain fuel methods are causing irreversible damage to our planet and its ability to sustain life, while others argue about the importance of those fuels to sustain our way of life. Now, we mentioned in our previous breakdown that the scientists were also exploring the effects of climate change, and we even theorized that the entire season could be a metaphor for our changing climate and the sociological and economic impacts those changes to our planet can cause. Pete theorizes that a polar bear may have gotten into the facility, causing the scientists to flee, a callback to the polar bear imagery that we've been getting with both the stuffed animal and the polar bear we saw at the end of the previous episode. Speaking of polar bears, here we can see a polar bear drawing looking over them. Now, during Pete's investigation, we hear this guy say,
You see people who are gone sometimes. It's a long night. Even the dead get bored.
Now, I watched this scene a few times trying to decide if I thought this guy genuinely believes in spirits or if he's acknowledging the fact that the weeks of darkness can often cause hallucinations among the residents of Ennis. A kind of shared delusion, if you will. And it would make sense that weeks of darkness would begin to mess with you and everyone experiencing this darkness could experience delirium. The same can be said for the cultists of the Spiral Cult. They all share a delusion. Okay, so next, things get really eerie for those of you hardcore True Detective fans. We get the name drop of Tuttle United.
If you follow the taxes, you can trace it back to a shell company called NC Global Strategies, which in turn belongs to Tuttle United.
In season 1, we met Billy Tuttle. His ministries oversaw the funding of the private schools where children were victimized by the Spiral cult. Rust questioned Tuttle regarding the murders and their possible connection to the Tuttle schools.
Whatever information we still have from Wellspring.
This led Rust to being punished by the police department for daring to question a man of power like Billy Tuttle. But years later, Rust broke into Tuttle's house, and in his safe, he found the VHS tape containing the horrific acts the cult performed on women and children. So, the Tuttle Empire being involved with the funding of this research facility is a huge reveal that we as the audience are aware of, but Danvers just doesn't see it. This is likely because the Attorney General did a lot to cover up the accusations that connected the Tuttle name to the Spiral cult. But we as the audience know that this powerful family had major ties to the cult and the quest to find Carcosa. So, what if the researchers were unknowingly searching for something tied to the lore of the Spiral cult? As we mentioned earlier, Carcosa promised immortality, which is the same thing the researchers were essentially searching for.
The work they were doing could end up curing cancer, autoimmune diseases, genetic disorders.
Now, these 3-line chin markings are common amongst Native women in Alaska. I've read that the 3 markings can be meant to represent the 3 stages of your life, and they can also be meant to deter the presence of evil spirits. In the flashback of Danvers and her son, we hear the song Twist and Shout playing, answering the question of why Danvers was quick to stop the song from playing in the research facility. And in this flashback, we can see her son covering his eye, a callback to that one-eyed polar bear. Now, in our previous video, we discussed how a single eye in Native culture is meant to represent the ability to see in darkness, and how that's fitting for the show's setting. Another thing this single eye could be referring to is the all-seeing eye, also known as the Eye of Providence, which is often associated with the Illuminati. One interpretation of the Eye of Providence is that it's the Eye of God, and later in this episode we actually see what looks like the Eye of Providence drawn on this wall, but more on that in a bit.
Hey, is the one-eye thing kind of like a pirate?
Actually, a little bit. So, the reason pirates wore eye patches, right? It's not like every single pirate had their eye cut out. Pirates wore eye patches because one eye would be adjusted to daylight while the other eye would be adjusted to the dark. So, whenever they were raiding a ship and they went into the hold, they would actually move that eye patch to the other eye that was already accustomed to the darkness. It is possible that some Native cultures did something similar. When they went into a dark place to hunt, they moved the eye patch to the other eye so they could see better. Now, next we learn that Clark had the infamous spiral tattoo on his chest, just like the cultist we saw in season 1. And, interestingly enough, he got the tattoo after Annie did.
I got the same tattoo as her. That's 4 days after she died.
Now here on the wall of the skating rink, we get another look at the Blue King logo. Now, as we discussed last week, this could be another reference to the Yellow King. And throughout this episode, we're led to believe that there is something going on with Pete's father, Hank.
Love you, I love you. Just in case.
He wasn't happy to see Annie's file box was taken, and I think it's possible that he could be involved with the cult. Peter said that his father was raised by a monster to be a monster, so perhaps Peter and his father are part of the bloodline that is linked to the Spiral cult. We even hear Hank say this weird line about the importance of blood.
Blood is blood, Peter. Remember that.
The name of this camper is the Golden Eagle. Now, the Golden Eagle is classified as an avian apex predator, hinting that Clark could be a force to be reckoned with. In Clark's book, we can see documentation of different fungus. And then, as Danvers turns through the pages, we see some chaotic drawings and writings. So bear with me here. Some of this doesn't make any grammatical sense, but I'm going to read it exactly as it's written. Oh God, never say her name. Never say, I can hear, feel her. I can hear her name. I can hear her moving, her fingers. And then we have this drawing that looks like a drawing of the Earth's layers like we saw on the classroom whiteboard. The layers read, cold, dark, her eyes. And then the drawing of the Earth core is split in half depicting her eyes. The writings continue. I can hear her calling, her eyes, her face, her eyes, her face. The next page repeats these lines and adds other lines like don't forget and her fingers, cold. And on the second page we can see the addition of oh God, never sleep. And these writings are clearly made by a man who has lost his mind and entered a state of delirium. Exactly. These drawings and writings continue in the camper. We see this drawing of a smiling face that I gotta be honest with you looks exactly like salad fingers.
Somewhere over the rainbow.
But he's got this third eye on his forehead. Now this mirrors the spiral on the scientist's forehead at the start of the episode. It also ties back into the all-seeing eye imagery. The eye being on the forehead is alluding to the third eye, which is meant to be able to see beyond that of your own physical realm. Another goal the Spiral cult members hope to achieve through their ascendancy to Carcosa. In the camper, we also saw hanging dolls like the dolls from season 3.
Dolls are used as signifiers in the human trafficking underground. Like this blue spiral, it's code for pedophiles.
and bones like in Season 1. And on the ceiling, of course, we get this giant spiral symbol depicting the realm of Carcosa, and paralleling this shot from Season 1 when Rust looks up at the spiraling portal. And in this shot, we see a dead crow hanging upside down. Now, crows can represent death, as can any dead bird being hung upside down. In our research, we found out that it can be meant to ward off evil spirits and represent a connection to the underworld, which could be paralleling the evil lying beneath the ice and down in the mine. But in native cultures, it can represent the transition from the physical realm to the spirit realm. But in other tribes, it's been known to represent guidance and warnings from the spirit world, a sign to pay attention to your surroundings and clues within nature, which is perfect for a murder mystery. Speaking of clues, I think this could all be leading up to the return of Rust Cohle to Alaska to assist Danvers and Navarro, helping to provide the missing pieces they need to finally bring down the Spiral Cult. So guys, there's everything that we caught in True Detective Season 4, Episode 2. I'm really enjoying this season so far, and its return to Season 1's roots. Big shout out to Colton Ogburn, the writer of this video. You can find his social links below. And guys, if there's anything you thought we missed, or if you have any theories about what the hell is going on here, please let us know in our socials or down in the comments. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.